So Lounge. Today we are going inside the pattern envelope, and we're going to start with the instructions, which have all the information you need about the different pattern pieces you need for your specific design, as well as the layout and cutting instructions. But there's also really great information on all the markings inside, and there's a glossary to help get you started. So join me and we're going to go in for a closer look. As a refresher, if you didn't watch the other video on how to read a pattern envelope, we are working with this pattern, and specifically I am making B. Once you open up your pattern instructions on the inside, you can see there's a whole lot of information going on. To start with are the same line drawings that you may recall were on the very back of the pattern envelope. So those are all up here. And then below are the individual pattern pieces, the way that they look specifically for each design. Now you can see that A, B, and C are all the same basic pattern piece, and that's because they all have a curved neckline. And then D and E are the same pattern pieces for the square neckline. So when you unfold this, they have this helpful little guide underneath, which is going to tell you which pieces you need to make which dress. For example, if we're making dress A, which is this one up here that has the flaps and the drop waist, then you need more pattern pieces. So each pattern piece is numbered, and then it also tells you which view or which design needs those specific pattern pieces. So I like to go through and I like to highlight everything that I need for the view that I'm making. So I'm making B here, so we need piece 1, we need B, and that's going to be the front of the dress. Then I need the back of the dress, and then let's go over here, and I don't need anything else. So this is going to be a really easy pattern because it's just 2 pieces, especially for the view we're making. So I also like to circle on the actual pattern piece which one I need. So that's A, and then which is number 1, and then we need B, which is also number 5. So those are the 2 pieces I'm going to look for when I unfold the pattern pieces, the tissue that is folded up in the envelope as well. Now to go down, as you may recall, the other video, we talked about the widths and lengths being on the inside of the pattern envelope. So here they are. And once again, it's by size. So I'm a size 16 in this pattern. I am making B. So the width at the lower edge is going to be 50 inches. And then the length, which is the finished from the base of my neck to the end of the hem on B, is going to be 36.5 inches. So that's just additional information to keep in track of. If you want to make the dress a little bit longer, let's say you're a little bit taller and 36 as your back length is going to be a little bit too short, you can always add a little bit to your pattern to be able to make that a little bit longer, but still keep the proportions of the dress overall. There is additional yardage information on the actual pattern, but keep in mind this is for 35-inch fabric. So that is not a standard width. That's more of a vintage width. So if you're using vintage fabric, it may be 35 inches. Most of the fabric these days is woven in 45 and 60 inches, but it gives you the measurements and how much fabric you need just in case you're working with a lower width of fabric. Obviously, you're going to need more. You're going to need 2 3/8 if you're making a size 16, compared to if you had 45-inch fabric, you'd only need 1 3/4 yards. And if you were using 60-inch fabric, you would need 1 1/4 yards. So just keep that in mind. It's for the layout. You're not going to get the same width and the same layout once you have a narrower fabric. Next up, we've got fabric cutting layouts. So this will give you information on the different symbols and things on the pattern. So once you start cutting it out, you will get additional information. To start with is a cross and a circle. This is the bust point and hip line on the tissue pattern. And these are the measurements that are going to give the total garment circumference. That means that that's going to allow for the ease or the looseness of the dress over your hips and waist and bust. So obviously when you're making something, you don't want it to be skin tight. And if it's in a plain weave fabric, not a knit, it's not going to be comfortable if it's skin tight. So ease is factored into the various patterns, and depending on just the design, there'll be more or less ease. As we mentioned before, looking at the dress in actual fabric in a photograph, you can see that it's a fairly flowy dress compared with the illustrations that are just drawn. So it's a little bit harder to see how the dress hangs and how much looseness there is around the body because these are drawings. So that's one thing to keep in mind. You're going to cut on all the solid lines. I usually cut them right on the outside edge just to make sure it is accurate. Seam allowances are included in the pattern, and they are always going to be 5/8 of an inch unless otherwise indicated. All commercial patterns here in the US are at 5/8 of an inch. So just keep that in mind. Unless it says otherwise, that's what you're always going to be sewing out. Next, we're going to move down for additional information. Down here in this block section is the different ways that they're going to lay out the patterns in the layout instructions. So this plain white looking one is going to be the right side of the pattern, and the dots are going to be the wrong side of the pattern, and then the dark color is going to be where the fabric is, meaning that you'll be able to see it around the pattern pieces, and it won't be completely covered by all the pattern pieces. Next, we have these different little stars, which were the same as the front of the pattern or the back of the pattern envelope. And since we are doing nap, we're just going to go with that one. We want the 2-star layout for without nap, meaning that my fabric does not have a directional print, and it also does not have a directional texture. So I can just do whatever the layout is. It's going to be a little bit more flexible. So for single thickness, we're going to place the fabric right side up. For double thickness, it's going to be with the fold, and we'll fold the right sides together, so the wrong side of the fabric is going to be up. This little star means without the fold. That's another way for you to indicate what you're supposed to be doing once we get to pattern layout, so just keep that in mind. Now, this is the other important thing, Grainline. A lot of people skip over this. Grainline is not achieved by folding the top of your fabric to match and matching the side selvages. The selvages are the stiff edge of the fabric where it's held to be woven. So folding isn't going to do it. If you are unfamiliar with grain and you don't know how to get your fabric on grain, I've made a helpful video about how to get your fabric on grain, and it'll help you get to this point so then you can start laying out and cutting your fabric. Don't cut out your fabric until you've gotten it on grain, because some fabrics have been on the bolt a while and they can move up to a couple of inches even, just depending on how long they've been sitting there and how they were wrapped on the bolt in the first place. So if you want your outfit to fit well, then the best thing to do is get it on grain first and head over to that video. The grain line on the pattern is what you're going to match your fabric to once you have your fabric on grain. So this is this little arrow here. That's going to be shown here. You can see it over here. That line is going to be the grain line. That line is going to be the grain line. The other pattern pieces will have it too, but this is just kind of showing you what you're going to be looking for. And it will be an arrow with a top and bottom point to it. Now, if your pattern piece needs to be put on a fold, then it's going to have this little marking, which is a straight line with 2 turned arrows. And that's going to be the side of the pattern that you put on the fold. So when you're making in facings, for example, that are in view D and E, you need to put them on the fold so that you get a double-sided pattern piece. Let's see what else. And it says to use all pattern pieces along cutting line, cut all the notches outward, and we will get to that when we start talking about patterns. I realize now that I did not move this up. So here's the information on the fold. This is what the pattern pieces look like. It's not really applicable because we're not doing view D and E and making any facings. So you also, there's just a little note down here that you want to transfer all the marking lines of the construction before removing the pattern tissue. And we'll go over that as well once we get to the actual marking for cutting and layout. For a basic pattern, there are a lot of layouts here, and this may look very overwhelming, but it's actually not that complicated. First of all, it's good to know that when the pattern company made this pattern, they made one set of instructions. So there are layouts for size 6, 8 through 12, then you have the 14 through 16, which was the actual size that is contained in this envelope, and then it goes all the way up to the 18 through 22 sizing. So it's a lot of information, but it's not complicated once you just figure out what you're looking at and once you figure out what you need. So going over here, we have dress B. I only have pieces 1 and 5. So then we're going to come down this side and we're going to look at the width of the fabric. And we know that my fabric is 60 inches wide. So here's the first indication of 60 inches wide. My 16 is there, but it's only got 1 star. So that's for with nap. Now we know that my fabric doesn't have any nap, and that's indicated with 2 stars. So we're going to keep moving down. See, there's size 60 for layout for 20 and 22. And then down here you have size 60, 2 stars, which is what we have. And there's a little indication here that's AS, which means all sizes. So any sizes that are going to be on 60-inch wide fabric with no nap are all going to be laid out this way. Now you may be thinking, like, how do you know that? Well, if we go back to the side of the page, it's indicated right here. And I skipped over that the first time because I missed it too. AS, all sizes without nap. So you've got the AS and you've got the stars. That's what we have going on this pattern piece. So this is going to be our layout. Once again, I like to just highlight everything because there's so much information going on. That way, when I look at this, I know exactly what I'm going to do and it's not complicated. When we turn over the pattern, we can see that the instructions start for the various dresses in the different parts, but there's also additional sewing information up in this top corner that we need to know before we start sewing. So let's zoom in a little bit. And as you can see, it says that all seam allowances are going to be 5/8 of an inch. They are already included in the pattern, meaning you don't need to add them manually unless it's otherwise indicated. Now, these illustrations are going to apply to the various parts of the construction process. So even though we had dots meaning the wrong side of the pattern piece when we were laying out and cutting, this now means interfacing. So just something to keep in mind. All the little drawings here may not apply to whatever you're making. It's kind of a standard key that all the commercial patterns use. Now, next is going to be some sewing tips. First one is how to trim seams, then how to trim corners, how to notch out curves, and how to clip inner curves. So you may be thinking, like, I don't know what I'm looking at in these tiny little pictures. No worries. We're going to go into these different techniques as we get to them in various projects. Suffice to say that a single illustration is not the easiest thing to learn from when you are a beginner. Moving on to the glossary, these are sewing terms that are going to be included in these instructions once we start to make the dress, and I will explain them as we get to them if they apply. So finishing is how you're going to finish the seams. Reinforcing is stitching along seam line for added support. Slip stitching is going to be used with a hand needle to tack up fabric. And then understitching is going to be used on facings to get them to curve to the inside of the fabric, inside of the dress. So we're not going to be using understitching in this project because dress B does not have any facings. But we'll go over all of these individually as we go through the pattern and put it together. that's going to be a basic overview of the things you need to know when you start prepping your pattern for cutting. And we're going to start with the pattern pieces. If you follow the tip of using the highlighting, it's really going to help you keep track of everything and make sure that you cut out all the pattern pieces you need. This is a very, very basic pattern, so I only need 2 pattern pieces, but as you progress and get better and start making more complicated patterns, there are going to be a lot more pattern pieces. And it really helps to sit down and take the time to go through all this information, highlight what you need, so that when you get ready to cut out your pattern, you know exactly what you're doing. Other thing is having an idea of the fabric layout, how you're going to lay out your fabric to put your pattern pieces on, just to have it in your head. And then also the glossary is going to give you an idea of the skills you're going to need to make this garment. So not that you can't make the garment if you have no idea what those things mean, but it's just kind of keeping you keeping it in your head that this is what I'm going to need to do when I finally make this pattern. Now, once again, super easy pattern, 2 pieces. Everything in the glossary is totally manageable for a beginner, and I'm going to walk you through it step by step. Tune in to the next video where we're going to talk about cutting out your patterns, and we're going to use the same system of highlighting different pieces that you need to just get you used to doing that. If you've got questions and know when to answer them, head on over to Facebook and check out Let's Talk Sewing for Beginners, hosted by So Lounge. It's an interactive Facebook group where you can ask all the questions you want, and I'll do my very best to answer them. I go live on Wednesdays at 4:30 Central Standard Time for either a Q&A or a tutorial, so be sure to tune in. Until then, happy sewing!